If we are not speaking about our challenges and problems in the workplace, so if we don't trust our colleagues to open up and speak and share what is going through in our life, then we're gonna feel isolated, we're gonna feel lonely, and with that term executive loneliness was taken.
I'm Dr. Joey, and welcome back to the Work Positive Podcast, coaching you to grow people and profits by creating a positive work culture. So one of the first questions we often ask one another on meeting for the first time is, nice to meet you. What do you do? And most of us respond with something like, I'm the insert title here for insert company name here. And then the conversation turns to, oh, well, how long have you been there? Or, something like that. But let me ask you this, who are you beyond that role? Who are you besides a people leader? And it's so easy for us to wrap our entire identity around a role, and yet we know we're people with many facets. So what keeps you from claiming all of who you are in a more holistic way? And what's the effect of your identifying yourself almost exclusively by your work role? My guest today is a professional speaker, best-selling author, executive coach, and a supervised counselor and psychotherapist specializing in holistic leadership, mental well-being, and identity beyond performance. He wrote a book called Executive Loneliness. It's an international bestseller. It's all about isolation, stress, and depression in leaders just like you. He's a former senior executive himself. His own journey through burnout recovery has shaped his understanding of success and meaning. And today he works with founders, second-gen leaders, and senior executives like you and me worldwide, integrating psychology, his lived experience, and his 5 steps to holistic leadership to help leaders identify, expand their identity beyond their current role with clarity, authenticity, and sustainable performance. Hey, I'm so glad you're here and that you can discover today how to work positive and live positive too. Hey, Work Positive community, you are in for such a treat. Nick Johnson is here with us. Nick, welcome to the Work Positive Podcast. Glad to have you on.
Thank you so much, Joey. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I must admit I'm a little bit intimidated by you because hanging on the wall right behind you, in case you're listening to this, can't see it, go to YouTube and look at what's hanging on the wall. Nick Johnson is an Iron Man. So that's, how far do you bike?
Well, it depends. Let's see if I can tell you in miles. So we basically do a 2.4 mile swim. Then we cycle for 112 miles.
Did you say 112?
Yes, sir. And then after that, we run a marathon, which is 26.2 mile, I believe.
Yeah, it is 26.2. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That is incredible. Well, all hail to Nick Johnson. You're amazing, man. You're amazing. So before I hit record, thank God I hit record, right? Before I hit record, we were talking about how we both love being outdoors, and you were telling me you're outside 25 to 30 hours a week. I guess that's a part of your Ironman training, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's what it takes. If we want to compete in that sport, we got to train, and most of that time is spent cycling, and it's low impact therefore. So it's many hours on the ride, cycling, and I try to do it when it's winter in Europe. I'm based in Southeast Asia, where I am now in Phuket, Thailand, and we have nice nature parks pretty much on the doorstep, so I can go out in the nature and cycle.
Wow. I mean, I know it takes a lot of hours to cycle, at least it would me. It'd probably take a day for me to cycle 112 miles. But what a beautiful countryside you have there in Thailand. It's just so lush.
Absolutely. Very green.
Yeah, I love it. So this interest in being an Iron Man grew out of what I would consider to be your origin story, because you obviously are a superhero if you're an Iron Man, but you're also a superhero in other ways. Tell us about your origin story. How did you get interested in executive loneliness and holistic leadership? And I'm sure your love of being an Iron Man came out of that story too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Sweden, grew up in a working class family as a blue collar worker in constructions. One day I had a motorcycle accident, got hit by a car, and the doctors told me that I had to basically change my education. They said you can no longer work with your body.
Mm.
So that was sort of the turning point in my life, and that was 1998. And I went back to school, and moved to Australia, and I haven't really moved back permanently to Sweden after that. So I've
Mm.
been on the road since then. Worked now in Southeast Asia for 22 years, and you could say that I felt I was given a second chance when after that accident I started to be hungry to study, and I earned a scholarship at the university. As happy as I was to earn that scholarship, the next day I started to be anxious about, perhaps worried that I will lose it. So
Mm.
that's, I would say, is the birth of the anxious overachiever. And
Mm.
I would say that I carried that mindset of working extremely hard to get on top of things, also in the workplace. And my corporate journey, you could say, I elbowed my way up to become the managing director, the general director. I did everything I could to get to the top. And once I was there, you could say that I felt lonely, isolated, and I fell all the way down. So that's the short version of my little ride.
You remind me of what Dr. Steve Covey was fond of saying. And what if you climb the ladder of success, get to the top only to discover it's leaning against the wrong wall? So that's kind of what you discovered. It's lonely at the top, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even lean against the wall. I think it was just a complete free fall all the way down. I
Oh,
crashed, I hit
wow.
my rock bottom. And
Mm.
at that time, I completely isolated myself with that. In fact, I was actually managing remote hospitals and clinics. So I was surrounded by doctors. I was very healthy. But of course, no one can see how you are mentally on a
Ah.
blood test, for example. And I didn't have someone I did dare to speak about with the challenges that I was going through. I
Mm.
guess it was my 40 years crisis at the time, and since I didn't have any way to cope with it, I dealt with it by starting to overeat. I gained a lot of weight, about 60 pounds,
Wow.
and consumed way too much alcohol until it became a big problem for me, until I became addicted to alcohol. And at that time, my ex-wife challenged me, and I wasn't ready to have a conversation. So I instead thought it was easier to file for a divorce. And with that, I resigned from my job and found myself even more isolated. So it was really bad, Joey.
Man, that's just a complete burnout, complete and utter burnout, wasn't it? In both your, not that we can divide ourselves into a professional and personal side, but I mean, your entire life was a mess. Tell us about that moment when you began the turn, when you made a conscious decision to do something different.
Yeah, so I was going down, you could say, in a spiral for about 3 years. I jumped from
Wow.
job to job, burning through my savings, and had almost become, bankrupt at the time and failed at everything. I lost my confidence and
Hmm.
everything. And then at that stage, I signed up for life insurance, medical insurance, and I wrote my will and testament because the thinking I had was that if this continues the way it's going, I realized I'm not going to be alive another year or two. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that I was suicidal. I didn't have those thoughts. I didn't have such a drive or energy in me. I was just in a depression and I didn't have anything to do. So that was sort of the state of mind I was in. But eventually something happened. I had met a woman who today is my second wife.
Ah.
I'm happily remarried. And we were just talking about getting married. And even for her, she had no idea that I was going through a challenging time. So on the outside,
Really?
no one could tell anything. Yeah. Apart from that, I gained weight. But apart from that, no one could tell anything. So
Hmm.
therefore, something, a voice inside told me that I should tell her before we getting married how I feel inside, and that was the turning point when I sat her down on the sofa, and I just, for the first time in my life, spoke honestly about how I felt internally.
Wow. I bet that was the most frightening, exciting moment of your life because you just declared, here's who I am. What was it? What was it that prompted you to declare that to her?
Yeah, and if I first just share why didn't I share before? Well,
Ah,
I grew up in that working class family. We work hard here. I grew up in with that mindset that and we didn't talk about feelings and emotions in the family. Uh,
mm,
it was that sort of it was quite tough in my neighborhood. I had to stand up for myself against the other boys. There was bullying, there was fighting in school, and I just learned to be tough. And that's what I thought. And as it happened, then a few of my bosses, as I was climbing the ladder, they were quite tough. The
yeah.
directive style, firm military leadership, and
Mm,
that's what I adopted. I had not experienced that kind of softer side that that we speak about. So that I didn't know it, and I had not never learned it. So, but it was my body at the time was crying for help, and in fact, my left foot was swollen like an elephant foot, and it was a
oh,
psychiatrist
goodness.
later on to diagnose it as a psychosomatic illness.
Mm,
So that was the state of my mind at that time. But as I then opened the voice, it's like and spoke to her, it's like I released that pressure naturally.
mm. But again, that was an exciting, frightening moment for you because you'd never shared that with anyone, how you were doing on the inside. And obviously, throughout your life journey up until that point, it was, I refer to it as suck it up, Skippy, right? You just, especially for us guys, right? We don't talk about those things.
Mm.
You're just a wimp if you talk about those stuff. So, what was it like to hear yourself open your mouth and say, sweetheart, here's who I am?
Mm. Yeah, it was scary, but somehow, I felt that she deserved to know, and she was shocked, she was surprised, and
Really?
she just jumped into action. She pulled me immediately and took me to a doctor,
Huh.
and I remember being quite shy, sitting in the corner, and she shared to the doctor my story, what I just had told her. And the
Wow.
doctor listened with empathy also and just
Uh-huh.
acted like it was normal, gave some medication. And with that, after that, she took me to a friend of ours who we knew had gone through some mental health challenges earlier. And
Okay.
here again was someone who listened with empathy. And
Mm.
that meant that within 24 hours, I was exposed 3 times. And while it was uncomfortable every time, something changed in me. And it was like I had a V-shaped recovery coming back to life through those experiences.
Wow, wow, that's quite a recovery story. 3 times in 24 hours. That woman really loves you, right? I mean, to jump into action like that, that is absolutely incredible. We at our best in our work cultures, I call them work positive cultures. I think one of the roles that we have as leaders is to see in others what they have yet to see in themselves. And that's really what she did for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it wasn't so much that she needed to say anything. It was more that I needed to say it and release it.
Yes.
Something happens once we have that awareness and we sort of surrender, which is when we release it, right? That release
Mm,
was already enough. And there's a reason why we have the term talk therapy, right? That was what
yeah.
I needed. And
Mm,
and just the fact that I started to take ownership and were ready to ask for help, that was the big turning point.
mm, yeah. Well, the fact that you could say it to her and she did not walk away, but instead committed to your recovery with you and began to assist you and got you in front of two other people within 24 hours. That's absolutely amazing. She must be an amazing person. We as people leaders have that opportunity with our folks. Now, not work positive community, not that we're going to become therapists or counselors like Nick has, which is an incredible part of your journey to go from I'm scared to share my inner story with anyone to now you help others, right? You lower the risk for them in terms of helping others. But it's not that we become therapists because I can hear some of us, particularly those who are in my baby boomer generation, saying, "Oh, I'm here to manage. I'm not here to, be a therapist or a counselor." So, how do we create this kind of culture in which it's okay to share our stories, to be authentic, to be vulnerable and transparent.
Yeah, and I say that starts at the top. It starts at the top of an organization, top of a family, top of a charity organization, or top of a
Mhm.
country even. I mean,
Mm,
it is somehow the leaders that set the scene. If you have a leader who is vulnerable and open, then the rest will feel safe to be vulnerable too. Um, I'm not proposing that it's about oversharing or being overly vulnerable and pour
yeah.
everything out to everyone.
Yeah.
That's not the point, but we need to choose perhaps a few people we can trust and be open and vulnerable with them. And therefore, as a leader, I think if a leader can own their mistake and say when they made something wrong and own that, that's a good starting point. But also, if they're going
Mhm.
through a difficult time, be human about it. If there has been loss in family, then it's okay to express that, I'm not
Mm,
at my best this week. I'm feeling a bit off, and I'm going to take a day or 2 days off because we have this crisis in our family. Then I
mm.
think we're setting the scene for the rest to also be safe to speak about their challenges.
Yeah, and that's so freeing to the people around you when you declare something like, my mom just got news that she has cancer and I'm struggling to work through that. So you guys please understand that I'm not at my best today. And just being able to declare that, I mean, I don't think that's oversharing. Do you, Nick? Just to be able to declare that, because if you don't, it's gonna that bad news is gonna leak out and in your relationships with others, and they're gonna think your colleagues are gonna think, what did I do wrong? How what's Dr. Joey got against me? What did I do to damage our relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not oversharing. Oversharing would be if we come in and we spill out for 15 minutes all the details to a big, wide open space office, and it's not for
Yeah.
everyone
Yeah.
to hear, right? That is
Right.
not attractive for anyone, but rather picking a few people who we can trust at work, a few people outside of work, and then again, if we don't have those people, then perhaps look for a coach or a therapist or counselor
Mhm.
or some charity or some hotline where we can get that help.
Yeah, and just know that those life events become leverage or a springboard in which you can seek help and need to seek help, right? From professionals like yourself. And look for those people like Nick did in his life, right? With his fiance there, speaking that truth to her and her jumping into action. I'm always amazed, Nick, at how we as executives isolate ourselves so much and think that nobody's ever gone through this, nobody's like us, right? And they will reject me, no longer respect me if I open up and share. I'm not at my best today. What do you say to those people? And again, I don't mean to be pejorative, but I'm assuming that most of them are men, right, in leadership positions. It's a little more difficult for us to share if I can just make that assumption. What do you say to those who know that they would benefit from sharing something but hesitate to share?
I think it takes a while for everyone to get used to that. So I think it's okay to leave them quiet for a while and while we share and make them be comfortable with that. And so when in my own story, so first I became quite comfortable to share with my wife and yeah, with the doctor, the medical services team, and then in a very closed circle from the beginning. I didn't share what I was going through to my professional circle or my contacts. I wasn't ready for that.
Mm,
uh, and even I remember because I had at that time picked up an alcohol issue and I had to address that. So I
mm.
joined a community, one of those anonymous programs,
I love it.
where I got the help I needed for that. And I remember the first 1 or 2 months being at those meetings, I didn't speak much, but it was those people who were there longer in the program who spoke, and it was quite comfortable to just be there and listen in the beginning. And I remind myself about that these days, that it's not about pushing people. They will come around when they are comfortable and ready for it. And then in my own story also what happened was 1 year into my recovery, that time was feeling much better and I was 1 year sober. Then something happened that changed everything.
Mm,
And that's when I went public with my story.
mm.
I lost a friend to suicide at that time.
Oh,
And a very tragic event, a very surprising event. Someone a friend of mine who I also worked with. And at that time, I decided to set up a charity fund to raise money and awareness for suicide prevention. And that's when I call it to break the silence in the workplace. And eventually I came up with the term executive loneliness. With that, radio, TV, newspaper started to interview me right away. And for every interview, I shared more and more and more. And before I knew it, my story had gone viral basically on LinkedIn. So at that time, I had to start to become comfortable with sharing the full story publicly.
Wow. I'm always amazed at how crises like that can propel us into action. I remember watching CNN back during the, what was this, in the 80s, maybe 70s, in the Tiananmen Square saga when that was unfolding. And I remember a lone man wearing a bandana across his face standing in front of a tank. And, I mean, it's an iconic picture now. And I remember Bernie Shaw saying on CNN that the Chinese have two characters for the word crisis. One means danger and the other opportunity. And the danger was, hey, I didn't share my story. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference in my friend's decision, but nonetheless. But you chose the opportunity there and said this far and no more. So Nick Johnson, I just want to applaud you and your courage in sharing your story internationally, because I'm sure you saved many, many lives physically, but I'm also sure that by talking about executive loneliness the way that you have in the book that you've written, which I want to talk about, that you have as well. Let me ask you a question. What if the key to growing your work culture hides in plain sight? Take the free Work Positive Culture Assessment to discover it. Get insights in less than 4 minutes that transform your culture so you grow people and profits. You just answer 13 simple questions and discover your culture stage, strengths, and personalized next steps. Get your free aha culture moment at workpositive.today. Go to workpositive.today right now. Nick Johnson is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive podcast. As always, Work Positive community. In the show notes, you'll find, he mentioned LinkedIn. That's how he and I met one another. His profile's URL is there. You can go to that. Also, his website, which we're going to discuss a little bit more, nickjohnson.com is there. And there's a link to his book, Executive Loneliness. So tell us about that title, because that we hear about executive leadership, we hear about all kinds of things for executives, but executive loneliness, where'd the title come from, Nick?
Yeah, so at that time when I was going to set up the campaign then to raise money for this fund, it was before AI, so I had to think by myself, and I knew that for
you had to, right?
yeah, I was forced to think.
Imagine that, a human being forced to think. That's hilarious. I love it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So I was thinking about for the entrepreneurs, founders, you have the term it's lonely at the top. It seems to be the CEO and so on. But I thought that's excluding all the executives, the directors, the VPs, and all the people working in the big company. So, and I couldn't really find a term that could describe the whole workplace and loneliness, but for senior leaders, right? And but then I started to do a search in Google, and it came this article by Forbes. There was one article talking about executive loneliness, and I thought, well, that sounds like the correct description here, because if we are not speaking about our challenges and problems in the workplace, so if we don't trust our colleagues to open up and speak and share what is going through in our life, then we're going to feel isolated, we're going to feel lonely. And with that term, executive loneliness, was taken. And it just made sense to me that that's what I had gone through. I was more driven about the titles, the bonuses, and the career projections, and how I looked on the outside than how I felt on the inside.
I think it was Ryan England I had on the Work Positive podcast recently, and he shared that a survey done Gallup gets credit for so many surveys, so I'll just give them credit for it. But anyway, someone surveyed and discovered that 86% of us identify as lonely now. And so loneliness has really become an epidemic. How can we communicate that our work culture that we're creating is different than other work cultures and thereby attract top talent? Because we're working on an open relationship, not oversharing, but authentic, transparent, vulnerable kind of work positive culture, Nick. How do I communicate that on Zoom or sitting across the table from some top talent that I want to invite to join our team?
Well, first of all, I can say when I wrote the book in year 2020 to 2021, basically, 2019, 2021 for 2 years, I did a survey, and the people I surveyed for the book, then it was 30% loneliness, and the numbers by Statista was 33%. So it has more than doubled, almost tripled then in the last few years.
Yeah.
So let's acknowledge that first, that it's not getting better, that's for sure. And how do we then attract talent? Well, I can tell you what I do. When I want to interview people to join my company and also my previous business, which I scaled up and built, I will send them an e-copy of my book, and I will refer them to the page, which is my darkest story. It's the darkest day of my life when I hit my rock bottom. And I said, if you want to know a little bit about me, you can read these pages before we meet. So that means that instead of sending a video clip how impressive and good I am, they can read about the lowest point of my life when I hit my rock bottom,
I love
and
it.
they can even see the picture of me here with my swollen foot.
That is
at
an
the
elephant
time.
foot. Good grief.
Yes,
I thought you were using a metaphor, but
yeah,
could
that
you
was
even
for.
walk, Nick?
No, I couldn't put on a shoe.
Wow.
So
Now,
so that
work
was my
positive
rock
community,
bottom.
remember we talked about he's an Iron Man and the medals on the wall are his right now. So what an amazing recovery
Yeah.
story. So you just, before you even meet them, you get vulnerable, you get up front and you just say, here's my story.
Absolutely, that's what I do, and that means that they already and many are intrigued because they get the full audiobook, but sorry, the full PDF book. It's 230 pages. I refer to one page. It's a small chapter, but many of them have read the whole book by the time they come to the interview,
Mm,
and some will be in tears when they come, and they will start sharing some
wow.
personal story. In my previous company, I hired a sales guy who um, within 3 minutes into the job interview, he was pointing at his shin and he said, I have scar here. I tried to kill myself with a knife one time.
Oh, good.
That was a person I never met before who wanted to work for me.
Within
We
three
did
minutes. Mm,
within 3 minutes.
mm,
Uh, we had a talk for about 1 hour.
uh-huh.
We didn't speak about his CV. I hired him and he was a top performer in my company.
Wow. Just looking for a culture where he could unleash his best, or as you would say, his limitless potential, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
love
he
it.
felt completely safe from day one, and as you
Mm,
can imagine, he will always feel safe to speak up for me. He would have my back, and he will tell me things which he knew was perhaps coming or happening.
mm.
He was almost like I had an ally. Complete trust,
Oh, I
complete
love
trust. And at one time we went through some challenging times, and he would be the first one to raise his hand and say, if I can do part-time here or if I can decrease my salary to go through this, I'm here with you, and so on. So you built an ally
mm.
from even before the interview. So that's my way. Maybe that's too extreme, but I think you get the point here, Dr. Joey, what can be done.
Absolutely, I love it. And so, not all of us write books like you and I do, but we can still share part of our story or find a way of maybe just a few pages of here's who I am before you ever get to the interview. What are some of the challenges that you see? Because I know you speak all over the world. You're going to be in, is it Vegas, talking at a Best Places to Work conference. What are some of the challenges that you see for companies today to create the kind of work positive culture we're talking about?
Yeah, well, the challenges I see is that many leaders are not ready to be vulnerable or not comfortable to be vulnerable. And maybe they already accept that I'm just not going to be that person. And I think that's the major challenge. If you don't have a growth mindset, if you're not willing to grow and learn, then that's going to be very difficult. But I believe that we can learn to do this, and we can do this one on one by coaching. It's just like someone is joining with a coach to get better executive presence or anything else. We can coach this. And I talk a lot about the vulnerability muscle, almost like building muscle in the gym. It's about practicing. And we can do that by then building up our safe spaces so we can be that leader who's ready to be that. Because what I find, at least the teams I'm working with, is that the younger generation, they want more of this. They want more
Mhm.
they want more meaning, they want more purpose, they want a bit more deeper conversations. And what I also see the biggest challenge for, should I say, the generation, and I'm 50 plus, so let's say 50 plus generation, then
Okay.
the, who are, if they are not vulnerable, then they will not connect with the younger generation, the fresh graduates these days, and they will just not get along somehow. Just a disconnect. That's what I find.
Yeah, I'm 60 plus. By the way, I like that, rounding it off to a generation, a decade. I'm 60 plus, and one of the things I'm discovering among my peers is so many of them are saying, "Okay, I'm out," because I just really don't know how to deal with Gen Z. And the fact is, Gen Z, the younger adults coming out now, they're going to be 30% of the workforce by 2030. So we definitely need to work to maximize their potential and help them find the kind of work culture in which they can prosper and thrive most. I think one of the challenges also, Nick, and I believe you put your finger on it, is that we're seeing 4 and 5 generations in companies today. So how do I, as someone 50 plus, 60 plus, how do we say, okay, I'm going to try a coach to help me begin to move forward so I can share some of my life lessons with others?
Yeah, and I think we can also do it in workshops and team building
Okay.
events and so on. And
Okay.
that's what I do a lot. I do a lot of these team building events. And rather than just having an event or team bonding or team building event for fun of it, try to go a little bit deeper and create an agenda with storytelling. People love storytelling. That's how
Yes,
you get a dopamine kick and you
that's right.
remember storytelling. So that's what we typically do. And when we prepare for these, I come in first and give a brief keynote about my story to set the scene, and then it's the most senior people. We prepare them behind the scene, also the CEO to disclose something about herself or himself that maybe the team didn't know, and then you put them on round tables and share something new, and then before you know it, people start sharing stories
Mm.
that they didn't know before, and then you're starting to create that culture that it's okay to speak up, and people remember each other then, and they look at each other, they speak to each other, they talk to each other in a different way. But we got to be
Yeah.
proactive, and if we cannot speak up, then yeah, seek the help privately and do it as a team. And there's also a lot of literature out there, right?
Hmm. Yeah, there really is. I love that you're creating safety in a group environment, so it's not just me needing to reach inside of myself and find enough chutzpah to say, okay, I want an executive coach to help me through my loneliness or whatever tag you want to put on it. Instead, you're creating a psychologically safe, as we like to talk about, environment in which that can happen. I love the floodlights, not a light bulb, but a floodlight going off and saying, "Well, I didn't know that about you," because we do treat each other differently when we discover something, usually an area of commonality that we share with someone that we did not know about them, right? Nick Johnson is my guest on this episode of the Work Positive Podcast. We could go on and on and on. I know you're working on a new book, Five Steps to Holistic Leadership. And then I know the website, Nick Johnson, that URL, the link is in the show notes there. So if you're on the Peloton or running, biking, 112 miles right now, and you're listening to this podcast, that's okay. That's cool. Just keep going when you get to a safe place and can pull off the road. Click on nickjohnson.com. So when I click nickjohnson.com, what am I going to find, Nick?
Well, it has my contact details, of course, on there. They have a social media, but also the product and services I have. And perhaps even more interesting, also, it has a self-assessment. And it's a self-assessment which is complimentary. And I can recommend everyone to go to that one. It's under resources, and it's a self-assessment, a life self-assessment, where you can rank yourself along the wheel of life, which we use in coaching, right? In all 8 areas of your life on a scale of 1 to 10, where you are now and where would you be your desired score. So you can look at your gaps there, and it takes 5 minutes to do, and it's complimentary for any listener who want to try it out.
Oh, I love it. I'm going to go there and do that myself. Executive Loneliness, there's a URL to that on Amazon. We can buy that, and it's Kindle, paperback, and audiobook, right? So whatever way you best consume content these days. And if you're listening to a podcast, I bet you listen to audiobooks. So go over there and get yourself that audiobook through your Audible account. And then also the LinkedIn URL is there so that you can go over to Nick's profile, connect with him. And that's a great way to direct message you, right? DM you and invite you to come speak to a company. So the Work Positive community, Nick Johnson always wants to know from my guests. So what's your one thing that you would encourage Work Positive Nation to do starting today to create the kind of work positive culture we're talking about here?
Yeah, so my encouragement to anyone who's listening today would be to see and think, who in my workplace can I trust and have a vulnerable conversation with? And it's about, remember I said it's like a muscle. You cannot go all out right away. Then people will be shocked, and maybe it's not going to work. So it's about just sharing something. It's one person you feel you can trust, you can go for a coffee with or take for a lunch, and just start, be a bit curious, share something that is happening in your life. And once you've done that, you can also ask an open question back to them and ask what's happening in your life. And what I find, once we have played the first card and we've been a bit vulnerable, the other person naturally start to also share something. So in my case, I do self-disclosure, and I did a self-disclosure today on this show and saying that I had an alcohol challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So any listener who have an alcohol challenge will naturally feel quite safe to go into my website and write to me. And that is what's happening quite frequently, either on a show like this. So if I give a keynote, and what the statistics I have is that about 10 to 20% of senior executives are struggling with some form of alcohol addiction. So that means that if you're speaking to 1,000 people, there's a big chance that it's 100 people there who actually listening, but they will not show it because these are the things that, with the stigma and shame, we want to keep secret.
Yeah, exactly. I am powerless. All right. Step one. So I love it. Thank you so much for your one thing. And Nick, thank you for your vulnerability. Yes, I am sure lots of Work Positive community members will reach out to you, and I admire you, man, to be able to go from being told that after the motorcycle accident you wouldn't be able to walk or do much physically, and now you're an Iron Man. You're our Iron Man. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your story today. And go to Amazon, pick up a copy of the book, Executive Loneliness. Go to the website and do that complimentary assessment there for yourself. Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Joey.
I'm so grateful you joined our conversation about creating positive work cultures that grow people and profits. Connect with me directly on LinkedIn today. Just search for Dr. Joey Fawcett, or you can click the link in your show notes. When you send your connection request, mention you're a Work Positive podcast listener, because I want to give you a free digital copy of my Work Positive Team Edition book. It's a $19.95 value, but I want to share it with you free because it contains practical strategies that I personally use with clients to transform toxic work environments into thriving cultures. We explore in that book how to create a positive work culture and we do so again in every episode of this podcast. Our LinkedIn connection allows you and me to directly talk about your specific challenges, so feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. I personally read and respond to all those messages because I genuinely care about your work positive success. So go to LinkedIn and let's connect. Remember to mention you're a podcast listener to receive your free Work Positive Team Edition book. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of the Work Positive Podcast.